So good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. And I'm pretty thrilled once again about today's show. We're in partnership with Liftoff PGH. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce someone who can talk a little bit about that and about our partnership this week. This is Generation Fempreneur. And we have two amazing guests here today, and we're going to do as much of a deep dive as we can. So I'm very excited about that. A couple of things that I just want everyone to know is that we've muted your microphones. So we've muted them to hopefully not hear things that are in the background. And we also have a chat, and the chat is used to ask our women today any questions or any comments that you might have. It is not used to sell your wares or to promote your organization. That's not what it's about today. This is just about conversation and dialogue. I want to give a big shout out to the companies that have been with us and our sponsors and have been incredible partners. And that includes Huntington Bank, Sheets, and Comcast. Each one of them has been very, very involved in all things COVID, whether it's small businesses, ensuring the eradication of the digital divide. And in terms of Sheets, they actually have an innovation center that's located in Pittsburgh working on the next iteration of Sheets. So each one of these partners cares about the work that we do and cares about making sure that we are, articulating what are the issues that face each and every one of us in these really interesting times. We're in like our 21st week of doing these each and every day. And I'm particularly thrilled about the partnership that we have with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation and their leadership as well through many of the pieces that we've had. I want to now just bring on, just so that you can really understand how we set the table, and that's with Mara Leff. She is with Liftoff PGH, and I'm going to bring her to the screen, and she's just going to sort of set the stage so we understand what's going on. And she reminded me that today is an incredible day. It's 100 years of the right of women to vote, 100 years. Not that long ago, and just a strong reminder that voting matters. Each and every one of us, voting matters. So I'm going to pass the baton quickly to Mara, and then we're going to introduce our guests.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I will also just echo how important it is that we use our voices right now. And it's incredible that it's been 100 years since that milestone happened. So Mara Leff, Director of Innovation for the Jewish Healthcare Foundation. Thank you, Audrey, and your team for this partnership. We have had a blast putting this together. We're calling it Generation Fempreneur, and it is a week-long series where we are lifting up the voices of some incredible women innovators and leaders here in our community. Generation Fempreneur is part of a larger initiative at the Jewish Healthcare Foundation called Liftoff PGH, which is our attempt to help to start highlighting and showcasing the incredible assets that we have here in the Pittsburgh region in our healthcare and life sciences ecosystem. So we are taking over the month of December and be bringing to you all kinds of incredible content, some national and global speakers, opportunities to walk through a virtual exhibit floor and meet some of the amazing change makers from here in our region with their virtual booths. Some incredible networking opportunities. So please check us out, liftoffpgh.org. Join us in December, and do join us for the rest of this week. I'm so thrilled with the two women that we have with us today. It's going to be a fabulous conversation. And thank you again to Audrey for the partnership. And I'm excited for the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for your leadership and passion around this. If you can't tell, she's pretty passionate and she's pretty focused, and those are the kinds of things that we love at the Tech Council and the tech community. So let's just start. We are going to introduce our guests, and I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves. I know a little bit about both of them, and I want to make sure that I'm doing a good enough job sort of setting the stage for all that they bring to the table. So we have two people here. We have Audrey Murrell. She's the acting dean at Pitt University's Honors College, and Ayana Ledford, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Carnegie Mellon. And so two powerhouses that are here in our region, and I want to jump in. I'm going to start with Ayana. thank you so much for being here with us. And you've been at Carnegie Mellon for a while, right?
Yes, I've lived in Pittsburgh for some time now, and I've been at Carnegie Mellon for over 12 years. Surprise! I can't believe it myself.
Mhm.
And in my role, I did things such as run an organization as executive director called Progress, which is the program for research and outreach on gender equity in society. It was founded by Dr. Linda Babcock, and I'm the founding executive director. And pretty much her research was on women in leadership and really looking at negotiation as an essential skill to minimize and work towards really gender equity, one of many actionable things that we can do. And so I translated that, academic research into practice. My role as diversity, equity, inclusion for both specifically Hines College and Dietrich College is really looking at everything from climate, changing to make the community much more inclusive, looking at retaining faculty, staff, and students, helping to really make sure they reach their full potential, whatever they define it to be. And so that's through programming, policies, practice, and really just accountability and transparency. So that's my little snapshot of all things that I enjoy doing and working on at the university.
Yeah, I would say it's big. It's not small. And it's important and it's wide. So really appreciate you giving us that overview and appreciate the way that you're taking research and, making it translatable to the community to drive change.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass now the baton real quickly to Audrey Murrell, Dr. Audrey Murrell. She is, I mentioned earlier, she's the acting dean at the Honors College. And just in the air transparency, I've known Audrey since I moved to Pittsburgh about 19 years ago when I was wearing a corporate hat and Audrey was actually doing work with Alcoa. So we have been colleagues and friends on and off in terms of all of our engagements since. But Audrey does some really interesting things at the university and outside of the university. So welcome, Audrey, and let's talk a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, wherever Audrey Russo points, I go. That's just been our history for as long as we've known each other. I've been a faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh since 1987. I was doing the math in my head, so that's well over 30 years that I've been a professor. I've had different academic leadership roles. I directed the Center for Ethics and Leadership for over a decade, and then I stepped in to lead the top 20 ranked undergraduate business program at Pitt. And then last year, I stepped into the role of acting dean at the University Honors College, which we're just having a ball. And I like this graphic because our offices are up on the highest floors, public access in the cathedral. So it still gives me a sense that I'm in the office. I've been doing a lot of research on issues related to gender and diversity in organizations, and moving between research and practice is what I do all the time and working with all different types of organizations. I also sit on the board for Women and Girls Foundation, which is a fantastic organization to be able to look at how we can help young women find their voice, both in social and public policy. I chair the board for Food 21, which is an organization that's looking at issues of food insecurity and food as a social justice and as a business driver. And I also sit on Pitt's board of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence because I've done a lot of work looking at how do we better utilize and reduce the barriers for minority and women-owned businesses regionally and nationally. So, and happy International Dog Day to all the dog fans out there.
Very, very important. Yes, very important for all of us dog lovers. So, these are interesting times, right? I mean, we talked before the show about, having elders in our lives who have never seen a life like the lives that we're all living in right now. Both of you are in the university settings, which is definitely in for a very trying time just as right now, even as of this moment today, everything with hybrid learning to, the issues around COVID and, some of the big impacts that we've had in terms of justice in our lives, whether that has changed. It's changed the conversation. It's changed, at least from the view that I'm in, of a rising imperative that is not to be minimized or eradicated. And again, that's my view. And Audrey might say I have a biased view. She's probably right. But I can tell you that I think of Ayana, the work that you are leading over at Carnegie Mellon as the kids get back to school, as you have a chance to work in, with your progress program and see things that actually get commercialized. What is on everyone's mind right now? So when it comes to engagement and including more women in the innovation economy, like we can only solve so much in the course of time that we're going to talk today. But what the issues that really matter to all of us here are: why are we leaving people behind? Why are we leaving women out of having big seats at the table? And why is it that we're struggling with these issues now? And what's on your mind when it comes to this in terms of pragmatically from your view at Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak from my terms because, I'm not going to speak on the behalf of the university. So this is from what I observed and what I've noticed and gotten a pulse on things. And first, one of the things is that, the question always comes up: why are there so few women innovators? And I said, there's tons of women innovators. It's just really, who is being elevated and positioned and granted access to promote their work. And who are the people in power making the decisions, right? And so I think one of the things that really is trying in these times is that providing access for groups to not only showcase the work that they're doing, right? Understand, know more about the institutional knowledge of how to navigate these spaces. I always talk about people come to college. Oftentimes, some of them have family members, peers, colleagues, mentors tell you how to college. Not everyone understands or knows these nuances that help you to really reach those career goals, right? So really, what is the networks, right? The networks to allow you to gain access to venture capital, right? And funding for the innovations that you're developing. But honestly, especially when it comes to women of color, is organizations, companies, institutions have to reckon with institutional racism, right, and oppression, and their role and contributions, and to really think about what new policies and practice need to be in place to really make sure those who are innovators thrive within the environment and the community, and we are providing that space in which they are given the platform to share and develop, right? While also, it, as the same result, is providing or serving as role models, right? So I guess really there's so many things, so many factors in play, whether it's access to wealth, access to career opportunities, access to the education, right? But then you're also looking at retention, right? And the climate itself, and to hold those accountable for those who are adding to a culture which is encouraging really people to leave, right? And what are the expectations set up by organizations, and what are the repercussions for those who aren't valuing what we say in writing? So in what way are we holding those accountable that aren't leading by this guiding practice? So there's so much, but I would say it's looking at also clearly access, clear retention, and sharing institutional knowledge and accountability, while also transparency.
Yeah, you packed a lot into that. I took some notes, and I think that you're right. Where are the words? How do the words even translate into action as well? So I think you brought up some really interesting points. I'm going to shift to Audrey quickly and give you the opportunity, Audrey, to sort of react to the statements that I made and the questions.
Well, I agree 100% with what Ayana said, and let me just add to that this really is a question of capital, right? This is not a question of capability. This is a question of capital, right? And so I want to be real clear that issues of systemic racism, unconscious bias, and just something that I call investment anxiety leads to the perpetuation of investment disparities. So it's very clear from the research, I always turn to research and science first, that venture capitalists have a different perception of women entrepreneurs as the glass half empty, relative to male entrepreneurs, right? So they're much more likely to look at, proactive ways to describe business ventures when they're headed by a male as, what they can accomplish and aspire. And there's a risk aversion, right? And that risk aversion is not steeped in reality, because we know that female-led firms, by the research, have a higher rate of return on average than male firms. We know that venture capital firms that invest in women-led businesses do better in terms of positive returns. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on, right? And so this persistent bias. And what's interesting to me is that that bias happens in some really odd ways, right? So not only is it the case that one of the things that the woman entrepreneur owner has to do to get funded is to have a male partner, which is odd. And so that's, part of what increases the likelihood that she's going to get funded. But the odd thing is that they tend to not respond positively when the business that's looking to be funded by a woman falls outside of what they consider to be traditionally feminine areas, such as fashion or things that that benefit children. So when you ask why are women still underrepresented as business owners in technology, broadly defined, it's because that bias is particularly robust when women are in what is perceived to be non-traditional types of business ventures. And then if you add issues related to women of color on top of that, both women businesses, but particularly businesses for Black women, are the fastest growing segment. Right. But they're also the fastest segment to be underfunded and undersupported and under-resourced. And so we've got to start to address how we should look at this, because it's no longer venture capital, it's venture careless, right, for what VC should stand for, because it's not what we would define as careful, thoughtful investment. So right. I agree with Ayana 100%. It's not that we don't have women innovators, we just don't have the investment. And so funds, like we've seen one in this region startup, that are targeting women entrepreneurs and women business owners is one strategy, right? And a second one is that we need greater board diversity in all of these VC organizations, because the research is also really clear. When you look at moving the representation of who is making the decisions, it matters. And as a group that I'm affiliated with often says, either you're at the table or you're on the menu.
Right, right. I mean, I think it's so fascinating, and I'm going to jump into some of these questions and comments here, but it's fascinating because it's intuitively, it should be aligned, right? If you know that you're going to get that return on that investment, why is that not working at all, right? Why is that calculation not working? Knowing that if you have a stronger likelihood of investing in a woman, investing in her work, and you're still not doing it, it's not a math problem, right? So it's a bias problem.
Not a math problem.
It's not a math problem. So here's a couple of things. Research has identified, this is from John Ingram, that any research on how the barrier has been addressed and the outcome. I think many of us on here know the stories of like Kleiner Perkins, women leaving and, being concerned. There's lots of examples of VCs that have not behaved in a way that's inclusive. Are there any examples of where you've seen it work? People are mentioning here like Springboard. We know Springboard, that's a female-run venture fund. They've done some investments here locally, but they're not from Pittsburgh, but they've done some investments. So then here's someone named Isabella Love saying, I'm focused on helping female entrepreneurs succeed in many aspects of business. She's saying that her company does offer capital that many banks will not. So there's some offering of that. And then
right, we had the Next Fund Act that started, the Next Act Fund that that Yvonne did. So that's one but that's just been since I think like 2016 they started. So that one's fairly new.
Right. And not only that, it's also size of investments. Those size of those investments are smaller, right?
Exactly.
They're much smaller.
Well, again, it's a new fund. So you think 2016, that's really young as funds go.
Right. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I was looking at Ayana because I'm saying typically if women are getting money, they're getting small money.
Yeah.
If any.
Yeah. I mean, there's, even with Intel Capital Diversity Fund that launched in 2015, specifically to address this need, at least nationally, the amount of funds even women are seeking, so, you know, they're not asking for really what their male counterparts are asking for startups. And that, you know, that deals with also knowing, you know, really what is your network, what are the asks being made, what is standard and customized to really launch these. So being reluctant to really make an ask for support, if assuming that the support you're asking from this donor or venture capitalist is one that they're willing and or to make. But even when asking, going out seeking that support, this really has been ones in which haven't been really enough to help a startup really thrive. So it's like begging for change, that grassroots kind of asking.
Right. You know, even here, if you look on the chat, you can see different people like Ellie Gordon, who we know, she's currently struggling with this very issue, getting funding to her company. And she's asking if you are a founder, please reach out to her and just, you know, either collaborate or try to use your resources to share that. The other thing is, and then I think Lenore Blum is on here and she's talking about making sure that you're connected to the resources that are over at Carnegie Mellon that definitely have resources. There are resources as well at University of Pitt, but remember, both of those resources are not necessarily the resources when we're talking about the big capital raise and the intensive kind of launch that people need to take their companies to the next level.
But, you know, I really want to echo that importance of women getting access to otherwise closed networks. So even though we like to say that sometimes it's up to the business owner to be able to press forward and make those asks, the research is really clear. There's a great piece of research that showed for people negotiating salaries, there was a perpetual gap in race and gender. But when individuals had access to people inside the organization, it absolutely erased that gap in terms of negotiated salary. And that's the same when you start looking at business owners. All it takes is to have one person who is connected with the fund, and it increases the likelihood, A, that you'll get funded, and B, the amount of money. And so that notion of closed networks is not just a myth, it is real. And I remember the first year that I started doing work in Pittsburgh, and somebody that was in the public sector said to me, you know, you're not from here, so let me explain to you our region. I'll describe it as a series of already settled arrangements, right? And that stuck to me. And I spent a lot of time, you know, on the appeals board for Allegheny County, looking at certification issues for MWDBEs. And every one of the cases that we reviewed and looked at the history and the background, it really validated that notion of how do you break into those closed networks? Because that really is where the decisions get made and the magnitude of those decisions. And again, research is crystal clear on this.
And Audrey, I would like to, you know, add to that is that it's just constant, right? Because we'll have opportunities to say, oh, we're going to have women in tech being mentored. And really it's that sponsorship to get that access, to be able to say, hey, there's someone in this C-suite position which is validating and saying, you know, invest in this innovator, invest in this individual's work, which there's a huge gap in that. And so really leaning on sponsors, and to do that, you really have to really provide that, that visibility, right? So how are we raising the visibility of these innovators throughout the region who are women, and really who are also women of color?
Right.
And again, I go back to the board representation. You know, it starts with leadership, right? And so we've got to, you know, I don't separate issues of ethics and social responsibility from diversity and inclusion. And so to me, it is a board's responsibility to make sure that it is doing appropriate utilization and distribution of the thing that's entrusted to them. It's a little thing we call stewardship. And so I consider it to be a failure of your stewardship if you are utilizing funds in a way that has been shown to be biased toward the people who are most impacted by your decisions. And so there is an accountability about how resources are used that I just think we need to face.
Well, it really is. I like to say it's all about creating prosperity and wealth. That's the elephant in the room. And the more that we can create women who have money and power, through that money is the way that we'll start to shift the systems. Where we are right now is we're still trying to trip the domino. That's what we're hearing by this conversation. There aren't enough of those people who are angel investors, even in our region. Someone's asking a question in here, Audrey, about how do we combat already settled arrangements here in Pittsburgh?
Again, I go back to we need people at the table where those decisions get made. And I think one of the things that some organizations in Pittsburgh that are doing is really making transparent the lack of diversity that's in the leadership realms across all different types of organizations, and been monitoring that, making that public. And so transparency helps here, because it's really easy to hide how decisions are being made and the consequences of those decisions if there's no transparency, both in terms of those decisions and who is making them. So I think, constantly making public the composition of the boards, the decisions that are being made by the boards, who is being allocated to, and keeping the pressure and the visibility on those decisions is really important, because it is an accountability. Leadership, across all levels needs to be accountable for the decisions that are being made.
Well, here's a comment about what does it say about our women's own assessment of their own self-worth, like how much they ask for, are these the smallness, what I call like making yourself small rather than bigger, in terms, is that deeply ingrained in women? Are you seeing that as a factor? And I'm not trying to say that it's a victim approach, but are we seeing that? And particularly, Ayana, you might see this even in the negotiation work that you participated in.
Yeah, so it ties back to also that knowledge, right? You don't know what you don't know until you get there, right? And you don't know what's at your disposal. So it's about, one of the first steps of planning and entering negotiation is really getting a sense of what is all in the environment, planning ahead. So, what activities are aligned to this, what's realistic for these asks, and getting that feedback from people. But it's also how we socialize as young people, oftentimes how women are socialized and, don't want to come off as, asking too much, trying to be modest in their approach. So it's really about thinking about what do I really need for the success of this product or startup that I'm trying to launch, and then getting feedback from colleagues who are doing well and asking them, is this something that you would do? Are these strong recommendations? And when I'm talking about these networks, it's great to network with other women, but if in these leadership roles are white males, then you need to build a network which is inclusive of them, because they will give you that feedback, and so that way you can make that assets aligned to their efforts as well. So I think there's strength in women networks and women forums, but it's really important for your business, if in these leadership roles and these decision-making roles are led by men, to make sure that you have a network that you could bounce off and get information from them as well.
I also want to chime in there. One of the things we do have to be very sensitive to is the intersectionality impact of often what we talk about. And so when we say women, yes, it is true, we're celebrating 100 years for some groups of women who had the vote, but others still didn't have the vote, until much later. And it is the truth, the experience of asking and the experience of advocating for oneself is very different for women of color in all different kinds of organizations. A great piece of work that came out recently is looking at this, in terms of salary negotiations and how people respond to women who advocate on behalf of themselves varies depending on whether or not you're talking about women of color or not. And even in my own personal experience, I remember telling somebody recently, I was going through some salary negotiations outside of Pitt for some work that I was doing, and was pressing them on. And the reaction was sort of a, how dare you, right? When I knew for a fact, because I had access to inside information, which is what you need to be an effective negotiator, that what I was asking for was really reasonable. And so the attribution, the reaction of people when women of color in particularly advocate for themselves is very different. And so as we're trying to coach women of how to negotiate, we've got to pay equal attention to the differential reactions that people have of them as we do to their own personal style of negotiation. And it is very different. There's no question on the research of this, that both race and gender and other factors play a role. And having access to inside information, as Ayana said, is critical. Having advocates at the table is absolutely critical, and having accountability of leadership for how decisions are made. I mean, that's the three-legged stool. That absolutely is.
I agree 100%, Audrey. Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a comment in here about social relationships and having friends. If you don't, and I love that one. I love that because I do think that's critical. I think if your social network does not reflect people who are look different than you, right? I mean, and I understand, you know, the importance of, you know, having a sense of community, and wanting to see people that look like you and, you know, belong to the same things, but that shouldn't prohibit you or even deter you from having a network of people that are very different. And I find that I ask people, like, who are your friends? Who do you hang out with? Who do you confide in? Who, and what do those people look like? Because you're creating sort of the reoccurring bias that you have by not surrounding yourself with people who look at the world differently, even through your social networks. And, you know, that's sort of my feeling, and that's sort of the way that I try to hold myself accountable to the world. But that's how the doors get open. You know, that's how the doors get open, because Ayana and I are talking and we're having coffee and we're talking about a couple of things. And I go, you know who I know? Oh my gosh, I know you need to meet them. I know, you know, and that's a methodology that's built into the fabric of your life. And I think very often we think that it's just a matter of getting the right people in the room. It's building relationships too.
Right. Well, and have people that sit at the table to make decisions. And it's one of the things that I really enjoy about Women and Girls Foundation is that we teach young women, girls, not only the permission, but the tools to advocate, right? And what does that look like? You know, how do you define an issue? And Audrey, is what you've done throughout your career is to be able to, wherever you're at right. whatever level you're at and whatever level of influence, right. to be able to advocate, to create the change that will help other people, right. you know, get to where you are. And permission to advocate and equipping people with the tools of how to do effective advocacy is really important work. I know that's some of the things that Ayana and her team are doing over at CMU. It's really important work.
And the thing is too, and I like to say it's like, you know, is and right, is not only equipping those to be able to advocate on behalf of themselves, but also making sure that the spaces in which they're advocating towards, right, are willing to sit down and embrace that discourse, right, and listen. So you can't speak, and, you know, and so how do you mobilize that? And so how do you change within the institutions and the companies to create that space of discourse and communication effectively, and to have those exchange of ideas where you might not necessarily come to an agreement, but, you know, at least we are all transparent and clear and have an understanding about where we are. When I talk about negotiation, I say sometimes when you make that ask, you might not get what you want, right? But the best thing is that at least you could find out, you know, how much can I get? How close can we get to? And whether you need to walk away and go somewhere else, right? So, you know, that's very, very important as well.
So, you know, we talked a little bit. One of the questions that I had was to talk about these psychological barriers, but I think we answered some of those things. And I actually get very discouraged when we boil down a conversation around psychological barriers, and like it's like our fault, right? And I don't want to have that conversation. But I appreciate. I don't want to have that conversation. I think we covered it. But you know, if businesses aren't promoting diverse candidates, how do we change that culture? We talked a little bit about this accountability piece, right? You talked about board seats, you talked about you know, how teaching people how to do things. I loved your terminology, how to college, because I think that is also about how to work. It's
Mhm.
the same, it's sort of a similar kind of operant definition. But if they're not promoting people, I mean, because what we're seeing in our world here, both in Pittsburgh and across the United States, that what we're seeing is that people are saying they're just checking out. They're leaving and they go to other places and they find, other solutions for their own lives so that they're finding places of community.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the challenges. That's why we're having this conversation, because if there was a best practice in place, everyone would be doing it. So it always drives me crazy when people say, what's the best practice for this? Because in my mind is that if there was one, we will all be adopting it. And then these jobs, these roles will not exist, right? And I think one of the things that companies really need to consider is there are people who don't believe that there is a problem, right? So they need to quantify it. So one of the first steps might be to do some sort of equity audit and climate survey to get a sense of where your company is, right, in this space, right? Then identify what policies and practice. It's great to have workshops and sessions and presentations, but really what's really going to be strong within what are the practices in place and policies that you have to hold those accountable and being clear on decision-making process, right? So did you construct a rubric in which, whether you're internal or external, you could follow and identify these are the core key things that we look for this role for, this to elevate or to promote this individual, right? Stay away from things such as fit, because it's dependent upon who's sitting behind the table, what that means, right? So trying to be as clear in terms of concrete skills that you are seeking for the roles for promotion, right? But then also who's around the table, because again, individuals are going to interpret how they digest this information depending on how they navigate the world and space themselves. So, making sure that when the committees are formed, that it is one that is inclusive and diverse. Even if you have to borrow people from if you're willing to borrow people from other companies, right? Look at external, because that rubric is one that is really clear, then anyone should be able to follow to expand your pool and help make those decisions. When conversations are had, making sure that they're open and public where everyone can add their input. But being mindful that if the challenge is that there's not so few women and so few people of color within your company, then whom else do you need to invite to really add to those decisions? And maybe it's someone external to help guide those promotions. And then considering your brand, right? If your company really does value diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Then how is that a part of your hiring choices, right? So when people apply or be promoted, are you consciously, explicitly making that a part of the decision, how they can contribute to community beyond just the company itself? Because that gives you a sense of really how invested they are in this work. And reckoning with what is explicit and what is maybe more implicit within the company. So in the culture, what are restrooms, right? Are there non-binary restrooms within your company, right? So those visual things also add into the culture and the climate of really trying to create a diverse and inclusive space. So I'm trying to, looking at time and trying to be mindful of giving some suggestions, but it's one of many, many, many things. And there's many, many, many challenges layered with this as well.
I want to add in there again, we have been studying this in organizations for a while, and we know from decades of research, three things are critical. Yes, having policies and practices that have been demonstrated to be transparent and to reduce bias in hiring and decision making is critical. But the other two things that we know is that we can stack all types of sensitivity training and awareness training, and it does not accomplish in terms of seeing the movement of diversity across the different levels of the organization. It does not come close to what a well-designed mentoring program and portfolio of mentoring does. It's clear, the data is really clear on that. And the second thing is not just leadership, but inclusive leadership, right? And so a certain type of leadership, regardless of what the person looks like, that a certain type of leadership that holds diversity and social responsibility and ethics as primary to defining effective leadership and holding that leadership across all levels is what moves organization. We know this. But I want to add, just because we know some things doesn't mean we do them, because it also means that ingrained practices and challenges to perspectives and challenges to power have to be relinquished and redone in order for us to move forward. And there's just not always the willingness. There's not always the willingness. And let's be clear that sometimes people believe that what is happening is because people don't deserve any different than what they have. And we still have to face that that's a reality in our world. And we've seen that particularly in 2020. And so I also always like to add to organizations, you have to work at a problem at least half the amount of time it took to create it. And so these are complex issues that took a long time to create. And so we have got to be diligent and steadfast in our focus on correcting the historic problems that we're all living in today.
Yeah, it's not a race, right? It's a journey. It's a journey that requires commitment.
Absolutely.
Being in the workforce over 30 years myself, I am and have had incredible opportunities, and and feel like the responsibility I have is to help others go forward, right? And I can't believe we're still having these conversations. There are days where I say, I cannot believe we're still having these same conversations. And I hope I don't go to my grave and we're still having these same conversations, because everyone says it's a journey, not a sprint.
Well, yeah, people get comfortable, right? In the way things are. And it's not that they're fearful necessarily of change. They're fearful of maybe losing out. What does this mean for them?
Remember, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Exactly. So it's going to take transformation, and people are going to really be willing to have to rise to that. And people like to say they are, but, are reluctant because they're comfortable of how it benefits them, and they don't want to lose. They don't see equity, inclusion, and diversity as a win for all, right? And that needs to change, so that way people are willing to put in the effort.
But, I got to tell you, I'm very optimistic because, my family teases me. They said, you've spent more of your life on a college campus than you have off. I'm not sure if that's a sideswipe of how old I am right now, but one of the things that I love about being in higher education is that I get to see the fire that's coming next, right? And it is no accident that if you look at the protests and the calls for racial and social justice, it is young people who are out there protesting of all different backgrounds. And if you look historically, it really is the younger generations that really take the mantle to create social change. And so I see it in the students I interact with. I see it in the students, not just locally, but globally. And so I am optimistic for them. They are much more well-equipped. They are much more vocal. They are much more empowered, and they demand a different world. And so because of them and for them, I am optimistic.
So, here we are. It's a journey. It's definitely not a sprint. You need to have friends. You need to have social relationships.
I was going to say it's a labor journey.
A labor journey.
It's painful. What?
And, someone in here was saying that we need to tell stories more about all the women and the work that they're doing. And I can tell you, like at the Tech Council, we tell a lot of stories. We try to celebrate. We have the Athena Awards coming up that we've taken over. That's on September 11th. And the people who were the nominees and then to get to the finalists were just an incredible mix of people in terms of their capabilities, that it always blows my mind that perhaps we still are not telling enough of those stories. And so that people know, because if we're still we're still finding them, then we're not in a good situation. So I'm going to take that as a task to say that we're going to work harder on telling those stories and getting the word out. But the other thing is that people are writing on this chat and are saying, wow, this is a really important conversation. We need to keep this up. We need to keep talking about it. what do you want to say to all of us as we start to close out just this piece of the conversation, Ayana and Audrey? What do you want to say? Like, what should we be doing? What's the ask that you have of the smattering of people who represent the tech ecosystem that are outside the walls of the universities?
Yeah, so, I guess is where you are, right? And, if you are on a board and it's, not representative, be that person and say, speak up. If you're in a position of power and there's a hiring practice being made or promotion and the pool hasn't been representative, are you willing to shut down that pool, right, of candidates? Are you able to give back to community, right? And really expose the rising generations into the tech field, right? So that they are aware that there's even these positions available. Provide that access, right? Are there opportunities to put together and do your own type of community funds to support startups, buy and invest, and women-led and Black, Indigenous, people of color innovations, right? Communicate, really identify, sponsor someone. Are you, and talk about them even when they don't know that you're even speaking to them, right? Become a sponsor beyond just mentoring, right? And share resources. And identify champions who are in positions of influence to help guide the next generation of enthusiastic, energized, hopeful members who are really thirsty for real change. And if you're not willing to do that, then just get out of the way and make the space. So don't provide the obstacles as well, right? And then also reckon with your role. Are you one of those people who maybe say, oh, I'll attend to this workshop and to this session, but when it comes down to really making hard, challenge decisions, do you make those choices? So really think about really in what way as an individual am I contributing to the status quo because I'm comfortable in the status quo, and utilize workshops just as a way to say, well, I'm trying, right? So there's so much that can be done. And if you don't have the bandwidth, maybe invest in those. So there's people who protest, right? But there's people who have equity or the access to wealth to fund those protests and sponsor them, right? So what can you do in your capacity that can make meaningful change, and do it?
That's a great.
No, I absolutely agree. And I'll just add a couple of thoughts to that. One, for the people, and Audrey, my friend Audrey is definitely in this, for the ones who've been laboring at this for a while, first, thank you. And two, don't quit, because we have made progress. It's hard when change is incremental to sometimes see, but the mere fact, Audrey, of where you're sitting and what you're doing in the role that you've had and in the roles you've had previous to this, the things that the Jewish Healthcare Foundation are doing and continue to do, these things matter. So it may not, nothing ever moves as fast as I want it, let me be real clear, but it is moving. And so don't give up the fight is thing one. And for those of you who are like, what should I do? Get involved, pick a space. You don't have to solve all problems, but you've got to dig into something in the space where you live and be able to not just tweet about it, but to get involved in it. I'm going to say, you got to vote, right? You have to vote, because understand what this is about. It is about equal representation. It is about ethics and governance of all types. It is about equality and access to power and resources. And it is about breaking down boundaries and barriers to collective success. Because one of the things that is holding this region back is the fact that we can't lift all boats. And so if we are going to be effective and successful and prosperous as a region, we have got to get about the business of diversity and inclusion. It's about time.
Well, you both are incredible. I can't thank you for taking the time with us and for sharing your thoughts. And hopefully they're easy to find. Both of these women are easy to find. And
come visit me in the top of the cathedral, it's right there.
Right.
but they're easy to find, and I hope that we continue to have more of these kinds of exchanges. People here are saying thank you. We need more of these conversations. Apparently about 30% of the people who are on the call were actually men, and it's important for us to have an inclusive conversation about all these issues. So I am honored to be able to do this work and to just moderate this. Ayana, thank you for all that you do, and we will stay connected to you. Thank you, Audrey. And we will share the, is it okay if we share your email
Please do.
for both of you, and the progress program as well? So really, I'm very thankful. That's all I can tell you. I'm very thankful, and I'm thankful for your wisdom. And thankful to Liftoff PGH for believing in us and doing a partnership here. So tomorrow, don't miss tomorrow at noon, we're continuing, and we have Courtney Williamson. Courtney Williamson has a company called A Bill of Life, and we're gonna do a deep dive with her. And this is a woman who is doing things against all odds on her own terms, making an impact in the lives of people who actually have, for example, Parkinson's. So on that note, thank you everyone, and we will see you here tomorrow, same time.